The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution.radio. I am your host, Diamond, from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project. My lovely co-host, Leah Schaefer, cannot join us today, so we've got a fill-in in the form of Ransom Godwin from Mountain High Time, a.k.a. 420 The Freedomist. Welcome to the show, Ransom.
YOLO.
All right, let's break it down. What we're going to be talking about today. It's going to be a fantastic show broken up in two parts. The second half you're going to want to stay tuned for. We're going to be discussing some very ancient sites, including Tel Abu Hureyra, which is in Syria. The title of the paper we will discuss in the second half is Comet Airbursts Triggered Major Climate Change, Initiating the Transition to Agriculture 12,800 years ago. And we've discussed extensively on this show, the Younger Dryas cosmic catastrophe. We'll go over all that, the impact theory and stuff like that. But before we go there, I want to talk about some current events in astrophysics. We're going to be talking about the solar polar fields reversing on the sun, and that means that we have reached solar max pretty early. What the implications are for the grand solar minimum, the solar cycle as a whole, and our future on Earth. We're going to talk about some discoveries about the Vera pulsar. This is a pulsar that happens to be 200 times stronger than anything possible in physics, and scientists are baffled. And that will lead us into a breaking discovery that hit the headlines yesterday. Dozens of objects beyond Pluto may have been located. Now, does that mean Planet X or Nemesis is coming to get us? What are the implications? Now, are you familiar with any of those topics I just brought up there?
The Airburst, definitely. And also, I just read that article about the extra objects out there in the second belt.
Yeah, now we're going to talk about some of the nonsense that's already been used, like the Oort belt, the Kuiper belt, the Oort cloud, which is really doesn't exist. It's more like a fantasy science fiction thing. And now they find more things like out there. And what does that mean? So let's quickly, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share the screen. If you're listening in Radioland, there will be a replay tonight on Magnetic Reversal News on YouTube where you can see the graphics that we are using. Ransom, can you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
All right, the sun's magnetic poles are disappearing. That doesn't mean they're going to go away forever. It's a phenomenon that occurs during the solar polar reversal. Now, if I say anything that you don't understand, ask me a question so I can clear it up for you and everyone else.
Sweet.
The solar polar reversal happens, it takes 22 years for a full solar polar reversal to occur. It is often referred to as the Hale cycle. But here on Earth, and conspiracy theorists and other people that dabble into solar science, we know of the 11-year solar cycle. Ransom, you're familiar with that?
Yes.
That is, in fact, just half of a total solar polar reversal. It's just one half where north goes to south. That takes 11 years. So we are currently at the point where the North Pole is switching with the South Pole on the sun. It takes anywhere between a few months and up to a few years if we look back on all the solar cycles. And that would determine the length of the solar cycle. Are you aware that the solar cycles vary?
Yes.
Yeah, so they can vary between, I think, as little as under 10 years, 9.5 years, to almost 13 years. So and that would be, each of those solar cycles is half of the solar polar reversal. Now, recent measurements by NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory has revealed a rapid weakening of magnetic fields in the polar regions of the sun. The north and south magnetic poles are on the verge of disappearing. And this will lead to a complete reversal of the sun's global magnetic fields, perhaps by the end of the year. Now, that would mean that we could be in one of the shortest solar cycles in 100 years. And we're going to real quick take a look. I want to get your thoughts on this. First, we're looking at the solar polar fields here in this graph. And you can see that all the north and the south poles are all converging here on 0. So that is one of the things that they are taking in consideration here. And you can see in the past, it's taken up to a year for the full solar polar reversal to occur. But back here in like 1980, look at that. All of the fields reversed very rapidly in 1980. So we could be looking at a similar cycle to this 1980 solar polar reversal, in which case we're going to have a short solar cycle. Right now, cycle 25 is just slightly stronger than cycle 24 was, which means that these 2 consecutive cycles are the weakest 2 cycles since the turn of the century. And if you look at this graph here, you can see in 1880, cycle 12 has look at this, a low side and a high side at the peak, which is exactly the same as 24. Do you see how it ramps up there? So I think solar cycle 12 is like 24. 25, which is a little larger, is going to be like 13. And then solar cycle 26 is going to be like 14, which is weaker than 24. And that will give us our little grand solar minimum there, which we're calling the modern grand solar minimum, or the Eddy minimum. What are your thoughts on that little hypothesis there?
Well, I was wondering how the graph goes down there about, was that 1880? And you're saying that's a repeat. So that would be at least, what is that, 40 years of low solar activity, according to that?
Yeah, and that's referred to as the centennial minimum.
And how does that reflect on weather on Earth?
It's just a mini version of the Dalton minimum, which is back here. You can see cycles 5, 6, and 7. That's the Dalton. Similar things happened here, including, you know what happened? If cycle in 1888, we've got Krakatoa. We've got massive volcanic eruptions. We've got the cooling of the Earth due to stratospheric aerosols. We've got some famines. Little bit of global unrest in the early 1910s, a small scale version of the Dalton minimum. So it looks like we're already experiencing similar effects now in solar cycle 25. We've got worldwide migrations. Now, albeit these aren't necessarily climate driven, they seem to be driven by the global cabal. But it appears as if we're entering another similar minimum to the Centennial or the Dalton. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you another question. That other, what you call the Dalton minimum right there, 1800, isn't that when we had severe earthquakes like San Francisco, when that 1812 or something like that? Or no?
Yeah, that we should expect at any of these low solar activity times. There are now peer-reviewed papers coming out suggesting there's a direct connection between increased cosmic rays and earthquakes and increased cosmic rays and volcanic eruptions. And what type of volcanic eruptions? The kind that we don't need when the sun is already weak. We're talking VEI 6 or greater, which typically don't happen, but it appears as if they always happen during these low solar activity periods. So that's not good.
No, I was going to ask about the, I forget what year was the New Madrid earthquake. Wasn't that around that same time period of the 1800s?
11 and 12. You can Google it on your end. I can't do it on my end.
Okay.
So why don't you bring that up?
All right.
And now we're going to jump over to the next article here in a first, which isn't really a first. Astronomers directly image the cosmic web. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, there are some computer models that show this picture here that's up on the screen. Ransom, you've seen similar pictures to this. And it appears as if the universe is connected in similar ways to the brain's neural network, which Elon Musk is currently working on hacking. But that's for a different podcast. So it appears as if you were to look at the universe from a distance, it is connected by filamentary structures. In the EU, the electric universe or plasma universe, we would call those Birkeland currents. And in fact, there are no places in the universe that are not powered by other places. So it's kind of like a neural network. And this is what's connecting all the energy from galaxy to galaxy. Now, the imaging here we're going to show you is pretty interesting. Take a look at this. This is in high def. They're actually imaging this based on data. And I want you to take a look at some of these filamentary structures that are in here, Ransom. You see them?
Yeah.
That's like hundreds of millions of light years long.
All interconnected there.
Yeah, it's completely against the standard model of cosmology, because this is all supposed to be driven gravitationally. So how there can be these, look at how straight these features go for trillions of miles. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And then, yeah, go ahead. And independent of that, then we have these huge groupings of globs that look to be regularly spaced. Do you see how that is? It's like boom, and another glob, and then another glob.
So that's it. That's almost like a giant electric cord.
Yeah, with maybe
all kinds of stuff plugged in.
With kinks in it every regular interval there. See that? Like every huge distance, there's like huge clusters of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there is something pretty regular going on if this, in fact, image is correct. And the fact that modern cosmology does not acknowledge these Birkeland currents, they say that this is somehow gravity driven, is beyond me. Can you see that in there?
Yes, and it doesn't look like things are being pulled to a center of a massive gravity well there. It looks like they're evenly spaced and pushed apart. I mean, what else do you call that? What is the name of those clusters? We call that a neuron cluster in the brain. And how do you get over the fact that that's exactly what this looks like? Macro and micro.
Right, and if you just Google plasma scaling, it'll show you that these types of electrical effects, plasmas, replicate from the microscopic to the macroscopic at any level. So there's a logarithmic function. So what you could see at the smallest scale in a microscope, you should be able to see at the largest scale, like thousands of light years wide. And that's what we're looking at here. Our little section of the universe called Laniakea looks like one of these little tiny neural networks, with the center and some wisps. And it's thousands of light years wide. I mean, it's incomprehensible, the scales of this network. And more importantly, with the pictures coming out from the James Webb Space Telescope, where these traditional astrophysicists thought we were going to be looking at the edge of the universe, what they in fact found was that when we looked at where we thought the edge was, 14 billion light years away, it is exactly the same as where we are. So there's big problems there.
Right, they kind of already knew this was going to happen, or at least they should have, whenever they started saying there were discoveries that were older than the Big Bang. Like, well, there's a star cluster there. We know it's a little bit older than the Big Bang. Well, that just threw it on its head in the first place. So how can something be older than the universe and just be sitting there waiting for it to appear next to it?
Yeah. And then what they did in the last month or so, Leah and I talked about this last week, is they wrote a paper using modeling, and they redated the universe to almost double the age, 25.7 billion years old now.
And wouldn't you expect that if we get enough science to look at the edge of the next edge, it's kind of like that old parable about looking over the wall, and then there's a whole nother world, and then you get to that next wall, and there's a whole nother world on the other side of that?
Yep. But at some point, because of the speed of light, there'll be an edge. And the speed of these particles, we won't be able to look any further. And so that would allow these people to continue on with their fairy tale ad infinitum, because there would be no way to look any further anyway.
Right.
So maybe we could be shooting some kind of cameras into the future at the speed of light out into the universe that could send signals back somehow, and we could then increase that distance.
Right, but it wouldn't be much because it would keep exponentially getting away, correct?
Unless we think about how fast technology is moving. In 10 years, we may have technology that's quantum, which
Right.
could move faster than the speed of light, where we could be sending images back from that camera at infinite distances instantaneously back here on Earth. I mean, that's science fiction, but soon probably science fact.
Right.
All right, so we got about 12 minutes here in the first half. Let's talk about some more baffling science coming out. The Vera pulsar is pouring out 200 times more energy than thought possible, scientists discover. Now, this result challenges our previous knowledge of pulsars, well, and all of cosmology. And they always have an amazing artist rendition of what doesn't really actually exist. Do you know that?
Yeah, I know. It's so similar to what I'm doing. Like if I want a concept, I just ask the AI, make me some stuff, and it comes out with some stuff like this.
Yeah, so this is an artist rendition of probably what is not happening whatsoever. So, and here's more of the fairy tale. When you just start reading the article, if you know anything about cosmology and the fact that things like black holes, dark matter, and dark energy are all they're not real. They're all fake concepts that are made up with mathematical constructs, meaning we've never observed any of them. They might not necessarily actually exist. And we only use them because we don't know about like 99% of the universe. So we made up these things. All right. So that as the caveat, let's read the fairy tale. Pulsars are what is left over after a supernova explosion demolishes a star. Okay, so if there's this explosion that demolishes the star, wouldn't there be nothing left over?
Or it'd be expanded out where you couldn't see anything, right?
Right. So these pulsars are supposed to be these super dense, spinning, super energetic things that were created, once again, out of a fairy tale. So supernova, a star explodes. If it blows out in all directions, how is there something super powerful left in the center? Anybody's guess. And then it goes on to say these dead stars measure just about 20 kilometers across. Now, how could we even, some of these pulsars are thousands of light years away. How in the world would we even be able to see something a few 20 kilometers across at 1,000 miles, let alone 1,000 light years?
Yeah, it would have to be so bright that it wouldn't make sense for what it's supposed to be physically.
Right. So the brightest things in the night sky called pulsars are now 200 times brighter than possible, and they're only 20 kilometers wide.
Okay.
It says here a teaspoon of this pulsar would weigh 1 billion tons. I mean, is anyone buying this?
No, I mean, like, I'm not sure what the comparison is of the supposed gravity from these objects compared to like where they talk about there's these miniature black holes versus super black holes at the center of the galaxy. And if they're holes indeed, then why did they spew out so much material on either end, just like other stars do?
Right. Well, we can explain that if we use the plasma universe model and galactic jets. And then this is nothing more than a Z-pinch here, which literally doesn't have to have any mass at all. It is in one of those Birkeland currents that we just looked at, where it all comes together and twists, let's say. It's kind of like when you know those the guys who make the animal balloons at the circus or at the parties. You take one of those balloons, a long thin balloon, and you twist it around and you cinch it off into two parts. That is what a Z-pinch would look like, which is probably what we have here at the pulsar.
So I guess the question is with that analogy, is it possible for these things to unravel, like after it's done balancing the energy, I guess, and just disappear?
Yeah, well, maybe not. Like we know so little. I think this is probably a pulsar is the very beginning, the initiation of the Z-pinch, and it's super energetic. And then what you get here is that this field may collapse and have lower concentrate, and then you get a sun, like a blue giant will emerge out of this after the energy levels drop down.
So you think this is more the beginning of a process instead of the end?
Right, because what we do know about stars is that they produce all of the elements, like our sun produces all of the elements in the periodic table in the solar wind, which explains why all the planets have all the elements they do in our solar system. And which also can explain when we get an object that comes to Earth that doesn't have the particular molecules that are typical here, we can say it's not from the solar system. So we know stars make all the elements. So at a Z pinch, you need to start making elements to create a sun, right? Especially if the sun is all liquid helium or hydrogen or something. It'll take time to create those elements here at the Z pinch. So first you get the energy, then you get the atoms, and then maybe you get little spin-offs and planets, or maybe the sun ejects its core, which becomes something else, and that becomes planets. I think that the whole model needs rewriting from the very beginning.
I kind of was going to ask you, is this kind of the same concept that we were talking about? You did one show where you were talking about the expanding Earth. Would this be similar to that as far as like it's gathering, hydrogen and stuff towards it, doing nuclear transmutation, building elements?
Yeah, so there would be a smaller scale down plasma scale down the Z pinch to a sun-Earth connected Birkeland current. We call it the Aurora. And at the core of the Earth, we're going to be having the transmutation of elements in the same way. Yeah.
Wouldn't that kind of go to the idea that everything in the universe is expanding in from our reference in size?
Well, I would think that there are some things that aren't connected maybe to a Birkeland current. There are a lot of brown dwarfs just floating out in space that don't have solar systems. Yeah. So, and then some comets are electric and some aren't. So I think at some point, like a terrestrial planet like Earth will eventually get kicked out of the solar system and then eventually become a comet or an asteroid and just degrade into a tiny rock and then hit something and then become dust, which becomes humans, and it's recycling. It's the cycle of recycling.
Right.
Yeah. So there's the Vera pulsar, baffling. All right, let's talk about, we got 5 minutes here. The potential discovery of a dozen objects beyond Pluto could reveal a new section of the solar system we never knew about. That just means they're going to make up a new section. Here's another title: Puzzling Objects Found Far Beyond Neptune Hint at a Second Kuiper Belt. Well, what's wrong with the first Kuiper Belt? All right, so let's first talk about the Oort cloud. That's the furthest one out. It's a hypothetical circular sphere of asteroids and dwarf planets and ice balls. Ice balls. That's another, we'll get to that later. That is at the edge of the solar system. It has a distance between 0.8 and 3.2 light years from the sun. Here's another version of that. There's the sun. The solar system would be in this yellow area. The Kuiper Belt would be way outside the solar system. And then the Oort cloud would be this huge cloud outside of everything. And there's a way to give you some scale there. And more fake representations there. So you have any thoughts on the Oort cloud? Is this weird blue section. There's our solar system in the middle. There's the distance. Any thoughts on these imaginary things, Ransom?
Well, it kind of brings me to the point that they say that there's all this floating ice and water out there, and yet I'm pretty sure that you've pointed this out. We have yet to find an object that is a big chunk of water floating around, even though they continue to call comets that. Which comet can they point to where they can say that for sure we looked at it and it's a bunch of ice and not a bunch of squeezed together rock?
Right. The only comets that they still call ice balls or icy snowballs are the ones we haven't landed on. Because when we land on them, they're rocks, and people are like, oh, well, the ice, then they'd say the ice is down in the middle. It's inside. So they always put the things that don't exist places that you can't go look at.
Yeah, it's more believable to me that if any water was delivered to Earth in this fashion, that it would have had to have been from destroyed rocks. And not in the form of water, but out of rock with just oxygen and hydrogen.
Which could also come from our sun through the solar wind. Yeah. And it also can be stripped away that same exact way. All right, so let's see what they say here. It says astronomers may have detected a dozen large objects lurking beyond the Kuiper belt at the edge of the solar system, suggesting there could be another equally massive second Kuiper belt hiding beyond the orbit of Pluto. Now, the Kuiper belt is a hypothetical region where these comets that regularly come in and smash Earth emerge from. And that's going to be a good segue into the paper in the second half. So join us in just 2 minutes.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine.
There was blood on the wire.
Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
The Secret Kindergarten is here for the young children of the world. The best program on the radio for kids, dealing with the most important topics in the whole universe. Fairy tales, music and movement, numbers, plants, animals, fun, colors, insects. Take care and cast your ears out to catch a story from the world of other young things. Reach out, up, under, and over. Sing a song. Talk about feelings. Just remember the magic word. The magic word is no. Step on into the Secret Kindergarten. Saturdays, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Revolution Radio.
Join me on the Brian Ruhe Show on Revolution Radio, Eastern Standard Time, every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. We talk about the four most vital things, in my view, affecting all of humanity. Number one is UFOs and aliens and their agenda for the advancement of humanity. Number two is the Jewish establishment's control over all aspects of human civilization. Number three, the truth about Adolf Hitler, how he was the opposite of what we've been told. Number four is advanced ancient global civilizations. Join me on the Brian Ruhe Show, Tuesday nights from 6 to 8 on Studio B on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at higher risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And we're back with the second half of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution.radio, number one listener-supported internet radio. So please go over to Revolution.radio. On the homepage, right in the center, there is a place that says Become a Patron, and you can do it too, just like I have. Welcome back to the show, Ransom. We were talking about the Kuiper Belt, the Oort cloud, and now maybe a third imaginary ring of objects.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, going into the next topic, it always dawns on me that I don't really care where the objects are coming from so much as when and how often and, what happens afterwards in a modern time.
Exactly. And this paper nails it on the head right in the abstract. Leah and I have been talking about it. Other people at the Comet Research Group have been talking about it, that there is a regular cosmic catastrophe cycle where stuff comes in and hits us. And why these people are focusing on imaginary belts of objects and not the periodicity of them hitting Earth is beyond me. In just the last 10 years, we have figured out that the amount of impactors on our planet is about 10 times more than we thought 10 years ago. And that number's only got to go up. I mean, why would it go anywhere else?
Right.
All right, so let's jump over to the paper Abu Hureyra in Syria, part 3. Comet Airburst triggered major climate change 12,800 years ago that initiated the transition to agriculture. Now, a lot of people are poo-pooing this paper and saying that, there was agriculture before this time. Well, unfortunately, the archaeology doesn't support that. So if there was, we haven't found evidence of it. But at this site, we find evidence of agriculture taking place right after a major cosmic impact, which caused a mass extinction on Earth. Now, this study investigates the hypothesis that Earth collided with fragments of a disintegrating comet, triggering Younger Dryas climate change 12,800 years ago. This collision created environmental conditions at Abu Hureyra in Syria that favored the earliest known continuous cultivation of domestic type grains and legumes, along with animal management, adding to the pre-existing practice of hunting and gathering. And the proposed airburst coincided with a significant decline in local populations and led to agricultural reorganizations of the village. Now, just reading that, so what's happening here in our study of the Younger Dryas impact is after the event, almost everything on Earth is affected. The majority of it's dead and obliterated. So if you were living in an area where you could hunt and gather, and then one day you woke up and the whole thing was burnt, and there's like one rabbit left, you wouldn't just sit there and cry and stare into your square. You would have to come up with a plan on what you're going to do. You'd be like, all right, we got water, we can grow food. And you would have to come up with a new plan. I mean, that's just obvious, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you would think that there'd be, an aftermath of people talking about what was going on and then deciding to find and collect any seeds that they could find that were still, viable, and then try to centralize them in a single place so that they could caretake them instead of trying to wander the wilderness looking for one or two seeds to maybe have a fruit or a vegetable come off of.
Right, and it could have been the remaining few people from many large tribes that finally, for the first time ever, had to work together. And by being from different groups, they all had different unique information, which made it possible to even do this.
Right, they might have even brought seeds from different areas and started what we think of today as commerce.
Right, or animals that they knew that they could reproduce, like birds or chickens or something like that. And so these events were so severe. I'm just going to read in the abstract here some of the evidence they found that we've gone over in previous podcasts. But this is evidence for the Younger Dryas impact happening all at once, melting the ice sheets, causing major tsunamis to wash back and forth major oceans, and literally restart the Earth. These events all followed the deposition of the Younger Dryas boundary, meaning what we're talking about here, the beginning of agriculture and stuff. Now, that layer contains peak concentrations of high temperature melt glass, nanodiamonds, platinum, and iridium. And all these proxies provide the evidence we need of a nearby low altitude comet airburst. And they say by a former Centaur. This would be a big bolide, one approximately 300 kilometers wide. And these are in unstable orbits between our planets currently. So the large body is proposed to have undergone cascading disintegrations, which means that you get this 300-kilometer wide object come in, it cracks apart into hundreds of different size pieces, which then crack apart into thousands of other pieces, and then it's game on. And what they're alluding to here is it produced the Taurid complex, which currently contains Comet Enki and 90 other asteroids with diameters of 1.5 to 5 kilometers. Now, the bad news, Ransom, is in previous shows, Leah and I have postulated that this is coming back again.
Yeah, I would also think so. I'm sure you saw the amateur astronomer from Japan that captured that impact on Jupiter a couple of weeks ago. That was just like massive. And whenever you look at the scale of Jupiter versus Earth, this thing was big, man. I mean, if that hit Earth, it would be lights out for us. And I was going to ask you, because you sent me down a whole rabbit hole last night. So I started looking at the ovoid scan of North America, looking at all of the supposed or possible impacts of, pieces of ice sheet or rock all across Florida, all on the East Coast, even in Kansas, New Mexico, Texas. This is the exact same event that we're talking about, correct? 12,800 years ago is approximately when they think something formed these holes across North America as well. And that's when all of the megafauna disappears. So I don't understand what the major problem is of putting these pieces together, because they seem like they're fitting into a pretty clear puzzle that all across at least the northern hemisphere, there were impacts and repercussions of impacts. And this is talking about an airburst explosion, which was probably just like a chunk of it, not too dissimilar from the Tuskegee, right? The massive explosion that flattened forest in Siberia.
Tunguska. Tuskegee was experiment.
Sorry. Yes, Tunguska. I don't know why I did that.
So this is all the same event, and apparently we have now more evidence. So the initial evidence, Ransom, is all coming from here, the Comet Research Group. You guys can go find the Comet Research Group. Just go to cometresearchgroup.org. There are tons of scientists involved in this. And all of the scientists that are on this paper, including Andrew Moore, James Kennett, William Napier, Malcolm Lecompte, Christopher Moore, and Alan West, are all members of the Comet Research Group. And it's growing in numbers, and the data is adding on to more and more data. And this is just the next paper. So the initial theory, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, is that the main pieces of this Centaur, they hit the Laurentide ice sheet. Now we have evidence that smaller pieces hit or airburst above continents before they got to the ice sheet. So this is all happening simultaneously. And there is also impacts of cometary airbursts over the Atacama Desert, forming the Atacama Glass. So these airbursts are happening all over the continents. And then think about how many pieces, if 80% of the Earth is ocean, how many pieces are hitting the ocean? And then the major piece hits the ice sheet and sends up millions of ice bolides. The estimate is that the majority of the big ones were ejected into space and then re-entered. So when they were coming in towards North America to hit the surface, they would have been traveling at terminal velocity times a lot. They would have triggered a magnitude 9 earthquake that happened for like 36 hours without stopping. So the earth was ringing. There were tsunamis sloshing around and everything was burning up. It was literally hell on earth. And probably where all of the, creation myths come from.
Yeah, absolutely. That seems to be the point. And also, this is kind of important as far as location, right? Because this is in northern Syria. When you go to Göbekli Tepe and the other site there, isn't there a representation of this event? Probably, before I heard people saying, well, maybe it was this event that they were looking at that might have been in North America, but this was right next to them. They would have seen this there.
Well, yeah, I've got all those pictures pulled up, and we're going to kind of wrap it all up in 20 minutes on Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, which are these megalithic complexes with incredible technology and bas-relief carvings that probably, if we're talking about some of the main pillar stones, represent the comet. And there we can see that is probably the comet in the bird's hand there. So we'll get to that in a moment. Now, the people living here, this is for context before we pull it all together. This is the Natufian culture. There were people living here, let's say, at least 2,000 years before the Younger Dryas event. And these are the same people that are here after the event, albeit in much lesser numbers. And the reason that there could be still people surviving here is because not only in the Fertile Crescent do we have this area, which is Ab Hureyra, which has been occupied since like 15,000 BC. But we also have Diran Kuyu, where there's underground cities. And these are all in this area. There are over 7 underground cities that may have allowed these people to survive. Because how they knew to build them before the event is the question. And how they knew to get this type of a structure at Göbekli Tepe up before the event, or did they build this after the event? That's the question.
I don't know. It seems more like a memorial or more like a historical piece than it does. So I'm thinking that this is something that they built right afterwards, and even mainstream science is, they're trying to push the idea of hunter-gatherers. They might have been hunter-gatherers, but not in the sense that we classically think of them. These are hunter-gatherers that are working on a scorched earth. They're trying to put together something. And what's funny is I find this really similar to 539 AD in the way that in the American Southwest, right after the worldwide, decline in crops and people and everything from all the volcanic explosions, which might even be tied to some kind of glancing blow also, because I read that they found quite a lot of cosmogenic material in different places that might have triggered all of this. But the way I say it's similar is the fact that right after 539 AD, within about 40 years, you see all of the empires die out and then new empires start. And right here in the Southwest is right when they started building stuff like, the cliff dwellings and Chaco Canyon and stuff like that, about 600 AD. That would have been like just 50 years. So that would have been the grandparents telling the children what they need to do to survive. You need to store grain. You need to start changing the way we live because this happened. And I was going to ask you if they knew if that did happen beforehand. Do you think they saw something in the sky, like some smaller airburst that they could see from where they were at that caused them to start digging?
Well, the theory I think supports the most logical, and it's the fact that this structure is dated to 11.5. And that is about 1,300 years after the event. So in the 1,300 years after the event to the third event, which is meltwater pulse, the third meltwater pulse, which is the end of the Younger Dryas, which it warms 15 degrees C at 11,005, they buried this during that next catastrophe, because the next catastrophe wasn't an impact. Something else was happening that was bringing us out of the Younger Dryas cold, and that's when they intentionally buried this monument that they had been making for, they had 1,300 years to construct this. And this is the most, I think, stunning evidence on what these people were doing. This is a picture of a saber-toothed cat, which went extinct 12,800 years ago. The only reason that 1,300 years later they knew of its existence is because this information was being passed down as part of the Göbekli Tepe complex. They were telling us about what used to be here on Earth and what happened. And what happened here on I think it's Pillar 12. Isn't that what this is called? Or Pillar 43? I forget what the number is.
Do you think those are pollen bags right there? I was going to ask you that a long time ago. I forgot. These look similar to all of the little bags you find in the Sumerian culture and the Olmec culture, all over the place. And a lot of people theorize what's in them. But this looks like a representation of those same bags. And you see the little animals on top. This seems like the whole thing seems like a description on how to rebuild civilization.
Well, the water pails are known in Syria to be water pails. And so if these are water bags, this is a very good depiction of the waters above. It's all water bags above, which would represent the Milky Way. And that these are potentially constellations here, 1, 2, 3. This is the part of the zodiac and this is what Andrew West got into, deciphering this specifically to 12,836 years ago. This is a date on a calendar here. Using Cygnus, and a comet probably came out of this region, which caused the event. So this is literally, before language, an encyclopedia on what happened on this day that they're memorializing here at Göbekli Tepe. It's a memorial to the event that changed the world.
It kind of also, is reminiscent of the story of Noah. Not in the form of a boat, but in the form that they made sure to put these animals up here so that people would know that, you can lose them, that they disappear. And that would have been even a more reason to start domesticating too.
Exactly, because we may not have these animals anymore if another thing hits us. Wow, so it is kind of all coming together. Here's the data at the Syrian site, which is very hard to pronounce. It's Abu Hureyra. Okay, Abu Hureyra. And first, they go on to show these graphs here are the Taurid complex and when it returns. It returns, and we get into that debris field every 2,000 years. And look at this. The next one is coming real soon. So that's bad news. And depending on how low the dip is, that's when you get the larger objects. So right here is the flood of Noah. And that was the next low dip, just like the Younger Dryas, flood of Noah. So I guess the third one, the next one, is going to be another big impact, maybe in a few hundred years. So that's bad news. Now, what does the data show us, and why are they saying agriculture took off? Because it's pretty obvious here in this graph. You've got nuts and berries here in green, and this means this is a hunter-gatherer society. They're mostly gathering nuts and berries. And then there's the impact layer, and above that, there is no more gathering of nuts and berries, which means one of two things. All the nuts and berries have been destroyed, and that's most likely due to a change in climate. And then they began farming. They began farming legumes and grains here, and some of the first grains to show up is rye. So it's very compelling evidence that exactly at 12,800 years ago, for some reason, we started farming berries and grains, or legumes and grains, and stopped collecting berries. See that right there?
Yeah.
And this,
go ahead. I was going to say also, I noticed in this study, they had some evidence of stone tools that seemed to be formatted for something else, more like stripping grain other than cutting meat.
Well, why wouldn't you? You would need it right after here, if in fact that's what you're doing. And so we can even talk about that. The Natufian culture, as early as this event, they have these are all grinding vessels. Why would you need a grinding vessel if you weren't growing grains? Look at this, metates. You can hunt, you can gather them, but to make stone vessels of, like this, you already know how important grains are. If there's a major catastrophe and just a few grains were left, you would know that one single grain would make 40 grains, would make 400 and
Right.
4,000, and then you're golden. You don't have to be a rocket science to understand how to survive.
Yeah, that's exactly why I compare this to kind of like Chaco Canyon, because they first started seemingly starting to cultivate in centered areas instead of just everywhere or wherever they were gathering food. And you can see they started making all of these things too here in the Southwest, exactly like that, because they transitioned where the food wasn't plentiful and they had to start producing it in mass quantities so that villages could survive.
And then that leads us to Gobekli Tepe and Quran Tepe. Nothing like this had ever been found before that dates this old. So after the catastrophe, if the remaining people now, you're all working together, you're farming, you can make it, the next step is to warn the future humanity of what just happened. That's your entire goal for like 1,000 years. These things are created. And first we just thought it was Gobekli Tepe. The truth is that Gobekli Tepe consists of maybe thousands of these circles. Literally mind-blowing. You would have to have everyone in the entire area working on this to pull that off. And yeah.
I was going to say, this also insinuates all kinds of stuff like the formation of governments, religions, etc.
Yeah, but there can't be much warring going on. There has to be a lot of cooperation to pull off this kind of stuff, like this bas relief. Look at down here. Look at this carving. Like, there's two guys working on this. This isn't one guy. There were lots of very talented people that were pulling this off.
Yeah, not to mention they didn't just this doesn't seem like a first try either. So there's probably older examples of the people with these skills from wherever they were living. This is just the one that we found. And there's a weird thing I noticed on this stone. You see that H underneath, right about where the Cygnus thing is? It looks like a H block.
Here,
And
yeah.
yeah. So recently, I guess in China, they really believe that most of these petroglyphs over here in the U.S. are from over in the Indus Valley, because some of these symbols keep popping up all over the world, kind of unexplainably. Now they're kind of doing it with the Chinese-centric history. However, they are implying that there was way more movement around the world. And this is kind of evidence of that, in my opinion, that people were coming from places kind of centralizing because there were no people left.
Yeah, and if you look at the back of the moai, it has a very similar motif to this stone. And that is, that's dated to just 1,200 years ago, which is probably a complete lie because it didn't fit the narrative when they had it. So they ran with that, which is completely stupid. Now, even older than Gobekli Tepe, 500 years, and it looks like a practice Gobekli Tepe, is Quran Tepe. Quran Tepe has the same stone circles and even weirder heads. Like, look at this, but it looks like they were learning this technique. And this dates to 800 years after the event. So 800 years after the event, we were making these types of monuments. And that 500 years later, we got this good. That is a pretty good progression, because you can see how pathetic that face is there. That doesn't look very skilled. It's kind of skilled, but it's nothing compared to what happens here 800 years later at Gobekli Tepe. So we could definitely see in a 1,300-year period that these artisans were getting better at what they're doing. And by the time we get to Gobekli Tepe, we've got thousands of these circles being made in just a few hundred years. And that's how important this catastrophe was to the human race at this time. And I think We're going to need another catastrophe like this to end the division on Earth and to bring us back together for one common cause.
Yeah, I don't see no other ways in that. And I was listening to one of your shows the other day, and you were talking about basically the continuity of government programs that are doing the exact same thing that these ancient people did, which is dig big caves in the earth and store a bunch of seeds and culture and whatnot. I mean, the U.S. government is doing that. We have like trillions of pounds of cheese they waste every so often. They just dump it out or try to sell it on market because they're planning for this exact event, in my opinion.
Right. And they don't care about you. They care about having enough people survive to help them out in the aftermath.
What are the odds, though? Like, let's get kind of woo-woo there. Like, if something like this happened, we would definitely, in my opinion, develop two different civilizations. There would be the older technological version hiding in the ground, and then there would be some kind of new agrarian culture on the surface. How does that mix?
Well, we'll wait and see, because I think the biggest threat is the sun.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.